Back in 1994, I was at university and nearing the end of my degree. I, like many people at that stage, was wondering what career I would end up doing. I'd started a course in electronic engineering with the sole purpose of being a broadcast engineer for the BBC. But by the time I was finishing, the BBC, they were kind of stopped doing a lot of that training in-house, so I was in a bit of a dilemma. However, at the start of this particular year, something changed. And I remember it as if it was yesterday. You see, at the end of one particular lecture, the departmental computer technician came in and told us, "I've put a new application on the systems. It's called Mosaic, and you might want to try it." And that was my first introduction into the internet. Well, not strictly true, because in the previous year we were using FTP and Gopher tools to move documents around the university sites, but it's the first time I realised the potential of what was to come, and it's fair to say it changed my life from that point on. In the summer of that year, I taught myself HTML, I bought myself a modem, and I started looking for work in that area. Now, to be fair, lots of people had the same epiphany at the same time, because by the end of that year, the internet had hit the mainstream, and in December 1994, this magazine was released. Now, .NET Magazine was the first mainstream newsstand publication in the UK which covered the internet in its entirety, and this is issue number 1. So I bet you're all thinking, well, that's a very nice story, John, but why are you bringing it up now in 2020? Well, I've been intending to review this magazine for a while, but something always else got ahead in the queue. But last month, in July 2020, Net Magazine, as it ended up being called, well, it published its very last edition. Another casualty in the global downturn in print media. And so this month, it seemed particularly pertinent to do that review. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so here we are, the very first edition, issue 1, December 1994, £2.95. You certainly can't get a magazine in the UK for £2.95 in 2020, but it's called the Internet Magazine. It's .NET, it's new. You will see lots of sci-fi images throughout as watermarks and as images in between all of the stories. You'll see lots of information superhighway mentioned. You'll see cyber mentioned a lot. Also, nice to know here, latest estimate, 16.5 million people on the net and rising. Well, it has risen considerably since that time, and it's now about 4.5 billion people on the internet as of like a couple of months ago, July 2020. So that's interesting. So let's open it up. Let's open the cover, and the full first page is shown. It starts with a very dramatic image and a very brief history of the internet. So you've got things like no internet in 1968, ARPA, no email, no news groups, no World Wide Web, and then in 1969 it all changed. Let there be light, and that was the time when DARPANet and ARPANET came, and they started branching out from a military organisation network to adding some educational establishments in as well. But we're going to go and browse through this magazine. We're going to push on a little further to the first piece of content. So if you open it up, you'll see an editorial welcome and the contents, and then the first piece of actual real text. So the first piece of content in this new magazine is some information about how the big operating systems, and I use big advisedly because it was a bit of a mixed bag, how they are all going to tackle internet connectivity. It starts with some mention of Windows 95, for instance. Windows 95 has a TCP/IP stack built in, but this is a year away from when this was released. So we're looking at Apple System 7.5, macOS Apple System 7.5, which had Mac TCP, and OS/2 Warp. Yep, that also had internet connectivity. That's mentioned down here. Now you know OS/2 Warp was one of those operating systems that nobody owned. It was still covered in the connectivity details, but other systems such as the Amiga, not even mentioned. And although at the time there was no official TCP/IP stack, there was options to get online with that and other systems like the Atari ST. And these were largely developed by the actual Amiga and Atari communities. And I know these things because I started to connect with my Amiga A1200 at this time. So I definitely got on the internet. So it should have been, I think it should have been mentioned in here. And as an Amiga owner, I would learn very quickly to be missed out on these things because this was the year that Commodore went bust. Now, before we move on, it's probably worth just mentioning that even on these very first pages, there were 2 snippets of information which would show how organizations would try and manipulate and control information. The first is a mention in the main article from a Mr. William Gates, no less, and he says that Microsoft is planning an online information and entertainment service. Now, this would end up being the Microsoft Network, or MSN, and was, I think, to be fair, a complete and unmitigated disaster for Microsoft. The second story, in the bottom right-hand corner, is about Kix, or Six. I never understood which one that was. I think it was Kix. And it's the stood for the Commercial Internet Exchange, and they were on about charging $10,000 for each internet service provider. Otherwise, they would filter out their IP traffic. However, within a year, this service would be largely redundant, and that just shows how quickly things were changing. So let's move on a couple of pages. There's some various articles on here. And this is the first story that really interested me. This is the first important article about a new modem standard. Now, modems have been on the go for many, many years. That's not new. But obviously with the amount of data that was coming and the type of data and World Wide Web traffic that was coming on the internet, they realized they had to get quicker. Basically, the data had to flow quicker. And AT&T and Hayes and US Robotics got together and they came up with the V34 class of modems, which was 28,800 baud. And interesting, that's about £340 here, which is like $500. That's a lot for a modem. I didn't pay that for my V34 modem when I bought mine. Moving on to the next page. We have an article about Compuserve. We have some information about Usenet groups down the side, but the main article is about Compuserve trying to wrap their proprietary software around the internet. And you know, despite them giving away hundreds of thousands of floppy disks on the front of magazines, and they were everywhere, them and AOL during the 90s were everywhere. Despite this, I knew not one person who had a Compuserve account. Although I understand they were much bigger in the US than they were in the UK. Also, if you had a Compuserve email address, you had an address for of the form 24521.1831@compuserve.com, and this was based on your Compuserve user ID, and it wasn't very user friendly, and people used to get it wrong all of the time. We also have the first full page ISP advert for Delphi Internet, and they had packages, which was £10 a month for 4 free hours and £4 per every additional hour. Or you could have the Advantage package, which is £20 a month for 20 hours, £1.80 per every additional hour. That's expensive, and you would quickly see that type of pricing disappeared. Moving on, we have some little snippets of data and information under the and ... column. Mostly websites about, in this case we've got Vincent van Gogh and Ian Curtis from Joy Division, Marilyn Monroe, some websites basically, just interesting websites. But the next bit of information I wanted to go to was on page 18 here. As well as having things like about Pizza Hut introducing food delivery over the internet. The article on here that I really wanted everybody to look at was the online money article. It was the first foray into what we have now with things like PayPal and Bitcoin, I guess. So they had 2 competing services, actually 3 competing services, actually 4 competing services, NetBank, Netcash, DigiCash, Cybercash. Now, none of those really took off, but I think that was just probably because they were a little bit too early. But the seeds were sown pretty early on, and everybody who knew how the internet was going to go realized that you'd have to someday take financial payments over the internet. So this was a start, but by no means was what we've got now. It was just the first foray. None of those really took off. Then if we go to the next page, we have, and this is what passed for content in the first magazines about the internet. We have just email addresses of the stars. So who have we got on here? Tom Clancy's email address, for instance. And who else have we got? No, just Tom Clancy, really. So there you go. But I think they were pushing this book. There was a book called Email Addresses of the Stars, Email Addresses of the Rich and Famous, available from Waterstones. Waterstones, remember them? £6.95. You know, obviously that wouldn't work nowadays. It would be just go to Amazon. It wouldn't even be go to Amazon. It would just do a search on Google, really, wouldn't it? Interesting. And then you have another advert, which is Trinity Systems, and they're selling software, essentially. They're selling software and computer-related books. So we come to the first part of the magazine, which actually has some journalistic content, and that's the New Frontier section. Some pithy little reviews, pithy little articles on a particular topic, done by different journalists. The first one is by William Pohl, and it's exalting the virtues of how the individual is important. And it gives us a piece on some of the benefits to the internet, such as how we can build communities. And something which is very apt for the times we're currently living in, homeworking. Even then, it was being talked about. Over the page, we've got a story by Ivan Pope giving us a view on how quickly the net is changing, and if you don't keep up, you'll be left behind. So even in 1994, they were talking about the old-time internet users bemoaning how this new World Wide Web fad isn't as good as Usenet. We've got another story over here, which I can't see the point of. It's a story by Davey Winder about trying to find Elvis in the internet because he hasn't been heard of for a while. Yeah, that's it. I don't understand that one. And the final section on the New Frontier part of the magazine is a story from Bill Thompson. Now, Bill Thompson is still around. He's co-presenter on the BBC's Digital Planet on the BBC World Service. And he has a big history of technological advancements and knowledge. So he's talking about DNS essentially, and subdomains and top level domains, all of those things. There's a good article there about that. And then the last section on the New Frontier is Dan Dern's US scene. So it's about what's happening in America, and he picks out in his story video conferencing with an application called CUC.me, which I remember using, and the fact that Mosaic Communications have started. Mosaic was one of the original, if not the original, web browser, and Mosaic Communications was spun off to build a new version of Mosaic, which I'm betting ended up as Netscape Navigator. So then we come to a section on page 32 to 35 called Infonotes. Now, they take this Infonotes section is where they take people who already love the internet and already use the internet for their day-to-day work and have an interview with them, basically. So in this section, we've got Terry Pratchett. We've got a film reviewer called Roger Ebert. We've got a CD-ROM artist called Caroline Parsons. And now we're at the centre of the magazine. The main crux of content in this magazine is from page 38 and for the next 18 pages. It's the core of the magazine. It's called Easy Internet. It's clearly what most people, including me, bought this magazine for. We wanted a clear, concise list, a digital encyclopedia, as it were, of all the terms we would encounter over the coming years. And this is where it is. This is where it starts. So we've got things like a brief history, which I touched on earlier on, DARPANET, ARPANET, how it became the internet. We've got a section on TCP/IP and how the data gets transferred around, who's in charge of the internet, the various bodies that go and look after the different sections of the internet. We've got things that really, for dial-up terminals we don't really deal with anymore. SLIP and PPP are protocols that we used when we were dialing up and communicating. There is a useful flowchart about what areas, which sections make up the internet. So you've got things like Gopher and mailing lists and telnets and internet relay chat and the web and how it all fits together, which is quite handy. And then we have things like email, which is the main one, and we have a glossary of top-level domains, .com, .edu, .gov, .mil, .org, .net. We have ways of searching, Whois, NetFind, things like that, for searching for people. And then some protocols and some applications which we never really use anymore. Archie, for instance, anonymous FTP. Well, some people still use anonymous FTP in 2020, but they shouldn't really. Telnet, which most people who have been in IT will have used Telnet at some point to try and connect to a port to see if a port's open. Internet relay chat down there. Gopher, again, another thing that we never really use anymore because World Wide Web came out and superseded it. Usenet. Now, Usenet are news groups in any other name. And although I don't use them anymore, they still have quite a big following on the internet for things like this. They have much more private conversations than your public forums. And this is a good thing. This is the first time, I've been moaned the fact that I was missed out as a Commodore Amiga user earlier on. Well, there's a paragraph here for Commodore, for Atari, Apple, PC compatibles, how we can get connected. Now, it does mention that the University of Helsinki's AMI TCP stack, which is what I used to connect to back in the day. And Amiga, the Atari has a similar community-based system. And both the Atari and the Amiga mentions Demon Internet as an internet provider. And I think Demon in the UK was one of the best internet providers for if you weren't coming from a mainstream computer and a mainstream PC. They had a really good community based around Amigas and Ataris and other lesser known computers. And I don't think without the Demon, I don't think I would have been able to get on, really. They also had the unique thing, I think it was fairly unique. I didn't see many of them around where you got a domain name so that you could have your own unlimited email addresses, really, because you would get a domain name of something.demon.co.uk. Mine was GM Media. I still remember it, gmmedia.demon.co.uk, and that means I could have John at gmmedia.demon.co.uk or info at, and that was pretty good. And you got free web space to hold your web pages with that domain as well. So they were just generally great. They don't exist anymore. I've just found out, actually, that they got taken over by Scottish Power's internet arm called Thus, and then thus got taken over by Cable and Wireless, and Cable and Wireless got taken over by Vodafone, and then only last year did Vodafone get rid of the Demon brand. So that's a shame, because the Demon were a very important internet service provider in the early days of the internet in the UK. We finish really with the World Wide Web, which is what people now think of as the internet, but still only a part of what you get out there. But it's a very important part, and it changed the way that the internet was used by, let's just say, lesser mortals, non-tech savvy people. They didn't have to get a command line up. They could do it in a nice graphical user interface. And then right at the end of the section, we've got a list of some of the UK internet service providers. Obviously, Demon are in there, Pipex are in there, EUNet are in there. Some of the ones that I remember, including things like Kix, are in there. But yeah, it's a bit of a blast from the past with some of these names that I've never heard of for years. So for the next section, we have the wired work area of the magazine. Now, this is basically a huge chunk of text describing how internet shopping and internet publishing is taking off, and there's a case study on a specific London advertising agency and how it uses the net. You'll see things like the original Pizza Hut's website for taking orders for pizzas, and CommerceNet and Internet Shopping Network, things that were not there anymore, really. They've all been, well, to be honest, they've all been superseded by Amazon. But it's interesting to see some of these pictures as well. And this is the case study for that London advertising agency. And then we get to the last real bit of journalism, and I think it's 3 days in the life. It's subtitled 3 Days in the Life of an Internet Virgin, and it's John Stevenson, who was then deputy editor of Mountain Bike magazine, who just basically tries to get onto the internet for 72 hours. And it has to be said, it's largely, he does this largely by phoning up friends who are editors of some computer magazine within the Future Publishing Group. For me, it's not my favourite part of the magazine, but then it was probably just added to give a bit of light relief from a mass of what is an IP address and what does a URL stand for. So I can see why they put it in. It's just, I don't know what it gives anybody, like I say, apart from light relief. So between pages 72 and 79, we have a section called Weird Scenes Inside the Goldmine, Net Cults Investigated. It is indeed pre-warning us of what actually is to come on the internet, because it really is 8 pages of cults and conspiracy theories, and to many people, what the internet was actually invented for. Now, interestingly, it starts off with a huge section on paganism before going on to things like Buddhism, Taoism, and quite how that comes under the umbrella of a cult more than a religion is hard to fathom. Also, if you're going to do that, why not put the other religions in the same pot? No, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole at all. Anyway, if we go onwards, it goes into Scientology and psychics, and but no such mention of things like UFOs. I mean, really, even in 1994, I'm sure there was a huge group of UFO enthusiasts out there on the internet. Perhaps they were just more innocent times. And that essentially is where the journalistic part of the magazine ends. From then on, it's just like a directory service. We've got page 80 to 85. We've got a glossary of terms, an FAQ, a letters page, which is effectively just a Dear Deirdre for the cyber generation. And and then into page 87 onwards, we've got something that they call The Reckoning, which are essentially they're book reviews. Yes, do you remember physical books? Bizarrely, some of these books, they really wouldn't exist now. I mean, amongst all of the how-tos, you've got one called Email Addresses of the Rich and Famous, and ironically, that could all be replaced by a website. Going on a bit further, we have again the yellow pages of the magazine. It's called the Net Directory, and obviously putting a month on it and a year on it, this was obviously going to be updated in every edition. So it starts off with just basically useful news groups and internet relay chat channels and websites and the like. And somewhere in here, after we get the subscription page, I can't actually open it, we have, yes, the .NET unofficial smiley directory. So remember smileys? They started out calling smileys, then they went to emoticons, I believe, and now what we know them as emojis. But there you go, that's the basis of them, and basically I just used the ones on here and not even all of these. It's a complicated scene as the smiley world. Yep, so it finishes off with a bit of ASCII art in here, some more websites, and then sort of some useful URLs, and that's pretty much it. It would be pretty convenient to finish the review here of the magazine because it's at the end of the magazine. It would be convenient, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stop here. What I'm actually going to do is go back and look at the adverts. Now, we've already touched on a couple of adverts when we've been passing through the magazine, but I think it's a really good yardstick of who the advertisers thought this magazine would appeal to and where we actually were with technology in 1994 to look at these adverts again. With the articles, you can only really take the position of this is what happened in the golden oldie days, or here are the possibilities of the future. But with adverts, it's all about now. So there are a few adverts for ISPs, a modem manufacturer, an advert for a Mac magazine. That's the kind of sort of thing that you would expect in this type of publication. But there are two sets of adverts I want to concentrate on. So the first one, the first two actually, we've got to go back to page 27, I believe. And that is for Massive Attack, a new single, and it's a music advert. And then this, followed by one on page 37, I believe, if I've got that right, which is for the Future Sound of London new album. Now that and that, so a trip-hop act and an ambient act. So that gives me the idea that this was marketed at, or the advertisers thought that this was going to be marketed at young, technologically savvy people. Not for the old fogies. This is for the new up-and-coming street cred people. And largely extent, they were right. It's interesting to see that there were music magazines, there were music adverts, full-page music adverts. They would have cost quite a bit of money. So perhaps they already thought that this might be a way of distributing music in the future, possibly. More likely just that the people who bought this magazine were young, and this is the type of music that the young people were listening to. So that's interesting, just from the point of view that this is who they thought that this new internet thing was going to be appealing to, was very much the young tech-savvy people. But then I want to go back. I want to go right the way towards the back, and the second advert I want to look at is this one, because this is much more tragic, really. These people here who advertised here were all advertising bulletin boards. Bulletin board systems were the predominant way of communicating via modems up until this point. And you'd dial a phone number and you'd get an ASCII-based system, or sometimes a little bit more visually appealing system. But it was just a set of information which was stored on a hard drive somewhere, and they were making the money by using these 0891 numbers. Even then, some of these are suggesting that they were connected to the internet, as if that was going to save them, by the fact that they could go dial this 0891 number, download stuff, but pay, we're looking here about 38 pence a minute cheap rate, 49 pence a minute peak rate. That's expensive. That's really expensive. So their model was flawed. It was the only way people could get this sort of data, this sort of information at the time, so that's why it worked. As soon as the internet came about, even though they were putting some gateways onto their bulletin boards, these, within a couple of years, gone, completely gone. So this is the tragic bit of the magazine, the adverts for bulletin board systems. Anyway, that's basically the whole review of the magazine. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it stirred some memories of olden days. God, olden days, even though I still think this is quite recent, but evidently it's not. I hope you've enjoyed it, like I say. Please like and subscribe and click the little dingy bell, and I'll see you in a bit with a summary. Well, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different video, and if you have anything else you'd like me to cover, please drop a suggestion in the comments section. I'd also appreciate it greatly if you could like, subscribe and click the little dingy bell, because that's how YouTube works, and it also means that at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, I might actually get paid for doing some of these things. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching.